Craig Wright is going to be our layout presenter tonight. Craig lives in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, a suburb of Madison, Wisconsin, with his wife, his two adult sons, and a daughter-in-law. For as long as he can remember, Craig has been in scale model building and trains. In the late 80s, Craig joined an informal group of narrow gauge modelers in the upper Midwest known as the Narrow Gauge Circle. This group was very helpful, knowledgeable, and the group's level of craftsmanship inspired Craig's modeling efforts. It's also instrumental in the decision to switch from HON3 to SN3. In addition to an SN3 layout, Craig also has a separate S-scale standard gauge layout. Craig combined his bike touring and rail fanning. Over the years, he's ridden about 80% of the narrow gauge circle. In addition to the narrow gauge circle, his bike touring has also taken him over the narrow gauge branches. There are also lots of the D&RGW mainline rail fanning by bike, including Tennessee Pass, the Moffett route west from Winter Park to Grand Junction, the Somerset branch in Colorado, and the Cane Creek branch near Moab, Utah. Rail fanning while riding his bike has given him up close and unique appreciation for the topographic challenges and geology served by rail. Defy gravity, ship Rio Grande. So, Craig, I like that you're sharing your screen. Everything looks good, and I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Jerry. Hi, everybody. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to share my layout. I actually have two layouts. One is SN3 and a separate S-scale layout. We only have time tonight to really tour the SN3 layout, but so anyway, big thank you. That's my wife in the upper left-hand corner, and for putting up with me and having all the ruckus downstairs and all the construction that's constantly going on. The picture on the lower left is me at Saponaro. That day I started the day in Montrose and ended up in Crested Butte. So that was a full day of riding, but like I said, it just kind of gives me a real good understanding of the lay of the land and the scenery around there. One of the things that really gave me an appreciation, so I've traveled through that whole area by bike, I've ridden the trains, I've driven the cars, I've camped out there. Chuck Conway's introduction and his gorgeous pictorial crest of the continent really kind of highlights the special attraction for the Rio Grande for me. Someone once said that the Denver and Rio Grande Western has been investigated and exposed out of all proportion to its size, locomotive diversity, and general importance to the railroad industry as a whole. And truly a case could be probably made for all of that. But that really fails to take into account two of the foremost reasons for the railroad's continuing appeal. Really, Colorado and Utah, I mean, those are spectacular states. It's the geography of the land itself that leaves the most profound impressions on the character of the railroad. And so in few places is any other railroad so spectacularly exposed over so many route miles. Though occasionally hidden from view, it's not always because the railroads are lost in the trough of trees or beyond the bounds of private property, but rather they are plunging through deep valleys and tunnels or clinging to the embankments far too narrow to share with other modes of transportation. So just traveling out there, the scenery itself just kind of captivated my mind. And then I found out about the railroad. So I had an electric train for as long as I can remember. I had Lionel, and this was my HO scale layout when I was 11-year-old. My modeling had advanced from a loop of track on the floor to a 4x8 sheet of plywood, and I thought I was really something, I'd even built a paper mache tunnel. And then the defining moment for me occurred in 1972 when RMC featured the 25th anniversary of the Goring Defeated. I was pretty amazed by it, and just really kind of the whole immersive aspect of Alan's layout literally soaked me away. The fact that the floor was a river, just a miniature world, and I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So that issue of RMC really for me kind of was the defining moment. A few years later, RMC featured Jim Harry's scenery techniques, and Jim Harry produced some diorama quality signature prototype scenes. And the quality of his work, the realism, the modeling techniques all made a big impression on me and really kind of helped formulate what I thought I wanted to do, even at that age. And about the same time as Jim Harry had his scenery articles published, my parents took us on a family vacation to Colorado in the Southwest. it was my first exposure to really to the Rocky Mountains and the Rio Grande. For me, the highlight of the trip was the Durango and Silverton. The picture on the left is actually one I took with my little Brownie Instamatic leaning out of the car. Um, so that really kind of, it was like, to me, it was like the Gory and Defeated had come to life and I was riding on it. So I thought that was really something. So when I arrived in Silverton, I went into one of the shops and bought Colorado Memories of the Narrow Gauge Circle. I have two copies now. My first one is so dog-eared and worn out. It's just falling apart. But the narrow gauge at that point, I mean, I had fully been bitten by the narrow gauge bug. So in college, during my last year of college, I worked part-time at a hobby shop. The hobby shop was actually located in that Milwaukee Road coach you see there. The building behind it was the freight house, and that was actually a big steakhouse restaurant, really nice place. Anyway, that's where I discovered the Narrow Gauge Gazette. I had no idea that magazine existed until I walked in there. And then they also had a bunch of HON3 Craftsman kits. At that time, I was still in HO, but I started buying all these kits from E&B Valley, Rail Line, Durango Press, Chooch. Bought two of the MDC outside frame locomotives. You know, I could actually afford a locomotive as opposed to a brass engine. So I had the inside and the outside frame, 361 and 268 in the World Fair Bumblebee colors. So at that time, I kind of considered myself a narrow gauger. So here's my picture of kind of where I'm at today, side by side of what inspired me and how far I've come. As a kid, I thought it was crazy that John Allen had spent like 25 years building and expanding his Gory and Defeated, and he still wasn't finished. And I've been at 35 years on mine, and I kind of know why now. In addition to that, about 10, 15 years ago, I started work on an S-scale standard gauge layout. And that's primarily based on Utah because I like Utah, but I also didn't want to add any more trees or build trees. So a little diversion to the standard gauge just momentarily. I've been kind of a lone wolf modeler. Very few people even know I have a model railroad. My wife is usually the person who tells people I have a train set in my basement. And that's what they typically think of as a train set, that 4x8 sheet of plywood. Anyway, I've had a few published articles, but nothing really much. And I posted a few layout pictures on Facebook. In 2021, I was contacted regarding a Facebook post of my S-scale standard gauge layout. You see here, Tony Kester from MR wanted to include it in Brooks Stover's article about S-scale in the 2022 issue of Model Railroad Planning. So that SD 5512 was my first foray into S-scale standard gauge. So I bought that, detailed it, painted it, weathered it, put in the tsunami decoder. And the location that I modeled here was actually the Price River Bridge at Castlegate, Utah. I've really gotten into like trying to model signature scenes. So subsequent to that, my Sn3 and standard gauge layouts have both been featured on the inside cover of Railroad Model Craftsman. That's part of the narrow gauge or the National Association of S-Gaugers promotion series. So that's about as much press as I've had. Anyway, so here's a little bit more of my standard gauge layout. So I did like to duplicate Utah's unique, beautiful geography. It's just another reason to model Utah is, like I said, I didn't have to build any more trees. So when I got into the design of my layout, you know, I wanted, besides the scenery, I think the Rio Grande appealed to me for a number of reasons, particularly the narrow gauge, what were really like mainline operations over the narrow gauge track. I like the classic looking mics that they had, lots of helpers, short trains due to tonnage, all very model friendly stuff. And also by 1951 or prior to that, they had daily passenger service. So those were all features that I thought were really appealing. So in 1989, we moved into our current home and I began doodling different track plans. I was still working in HON3, but the local group, the Narrow Gauge Circle group, there were a number of modelers in SN3 and ON3. I considered both as really viable options and selected SN3 and this track plan because it kind of checked all the boxes what I was interested in. primarily rail fan modeling of signature railroad scenes. The track plan provided pretty well. It provides continuous and point to point. So you leave basically Chama and go over this high line up through Toltec around Windy Point to Cumbres. You can continue on, and there's a return loop here that basically funnels everything back into the yard. You can start the whole process over. You can run it either way. So that was the appeal there. I made multiple folios of my track plan. So here you see not only the track plan, but underneath it you can see where the bench work was going to be and how I modeled that. These hexes actually indicate the height of the riser at that location, and I have a 4% grade going up here. So that was basically the bench work folio. And I also did one for scenery because I was trying to figure out how to stitch together all these scenes and make them palatable for all the different signature portions of the layout I wanted to include. So just real briefly, like this is the Ophir High Line, and this is obviously Cumbres. Windy Point was here. Toltec is here. Chama is here. The area I call now Los Pinos is here. Cascade Trestle. This area was, I didn't know what I was going to put here. It was kind of an afterthought. And it was going to be a mine complex, kind of like Clear Creek or something like that. But it's now Placerville. In addition to just having that two-dimensional top-down look, I also created some vertical plans. And so in this example, this would be the high line. So got the measurements in here, how far, how deep it was, so I could basically get the bench work right and the balance, all that good stuff. And this is kind of the result. So you go from plan to actual construction and then the completed area. And I was a professional project manager for many years, and my project approach was, big picture year by year. So year one was layout room prep. It was an unfinished basement, so I finished it. You notice in the one picture there's a coved corner, so I put that in. The bench work laying on the floor there is actually part of my old HON3 layout that I salvaged. The other folio that I built was for the lighting, because I knew once I had the bench work in place, it would be too late to put the lighting in. So I had to figure out where the floor joists were, and then the 2x4 grid that would be the ceiling, the suspended ceiling, to make sure that the lights were going to be blue, or to block, I should say, the areas that I was trying to light up and make people, highlight. I've since replaced all my fluorescent fixtures with LED shop lights. So by year two, I was painting the backdrop and I was doing the bench work. The bench work was actually, I had a coworker who was a custom cabinet builder on the side, and any 3/4 inch oak, 3/4 inch oak plywood, furniture grade plywood that he didn't need, and anything less than 24 inches he couldn't use. So I was getting like 8 by 3 foot sections of 3/4 inch plywood that I was ripping and cutting into the that was basically my sub road bed. So it's been rock solid. It hasn't moved. But the cartoon on the right kind of summarizes, my wife finally came down when the layout was kind of at that point, and she was shocked because she was thinking in the back of my mind I was going to build like a small little HON3 layout that I previously had. She had no idea. And that's kind of, I think, the takeaway I get when visitors come to see the layout too, is that if they're not a model railroader, they expect to see a 4x8 sheet of plywood, and they walk in and they're like, wow, I had no idea. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of know. Most people don't really think of like what's possible when they build a model railroad, because if they're not in the hobby, they probably haven't seen very many. So year three was mainly working on the scenery, track work, control panels, scratch building all the bridges. Nothing earth shattering in terms of doing scenery work. It was wire screen over gypsylite, and then dental plaster for the rock molds that were applied wet. The rock molds I made in my backyard on a sunny day with some latex. And you can see that's Windy Point. I've got circled in red there, and that's Windy Point that I was trying to model. So I was trying to get specific pieces of rock to, you kind of sort of get it, but close but not exact, right? That's the one advantage of modeling. We're all building caricatures and impressions of the reality that we're trying to represent. So rail fanning the Cumbres and Toltec Western, my layout. This is a classic view of Windy Point, taken near the grade crossing of Highway 17 near Coxo. I should also mention that I'm going to do a presentation to a local group in about a month, so I'm kind of going to double dip on this presentation. Some of you guys already know this stuff, but for those who don't, that's why I'm anyway. Windy Point is something I really wanted to model, and so it's the first thing visitors see when they walk into the room. So here's what it looks like when you walk into the room. That's 492 bringing up a freight. Here's a little bit better aerial view. Train going the other way down into Toltec Tunnel. The sequence or direction of my scenes are not in correct prototype order. They're sometimes mirror image. They're sometimes, run counter to the direction they should be. But unless you're a real nitpicker, they're going to look okay, I think. So that's going into Toltec. And so here's the tunnel itself. And then on the right is obviously the location prototype. Got the rock tunnel here. Had to model the Garfield Monument and the Telltale. Those were scratch built. Looks like the section crew may have run out of gas or they got something going on there. So Lizard Head was another, it's not something I originally planned to add to my layout, but when building and structure came out with the depot, I had to find a place to put it on my layout. So I built the depot, and loved that picture on the right of that depot just worn out and weathered. So I wanted to build that, with, the windows open and the curtains kind of flying out the window. And then the fact that they ran out of the roofing. They obviously had a leak on their roof, and they could only put so much of the tar paper roof over it. They must have ran out. Knowing the RGS, they were just short of money. So looking over the layout from Lizard Head is actually the tail end of the Cumbres Y. So I just wanted to add something visually to that area because otherwise it was just kind of, I thought it was a visual dead space. So the San Juan is coming up grade. It's coming over the kind of the Highline Loop area of my layout. And in the back you can see here's Cresco Tank, and here are the Animus bridges. This is the only area of the layout where you actually I have two tracks you can see simultaneously. So onto the Highline. I love this. I think it's a Bob Richardson photo. It's just classic Rio Grande. You got 461, Sunrise Herald, Stock Rush Extra coming over the Highline. So I had to build the Highline, then some of the bridges on it. I could only fit 3 of them. So you kind of get an idea of what that looks like. Another picture of above K37's smoke box is actually, there's a tunnel there, and that goes in, there's a switch here, and that goes into the hidden staging loop. So here's 46F from the Upper Highline. I took all the trestles were scratch built, as were the footings for the trestles. I used the RGS Story Volume 4 over the bridges over to Rico as my guide for building them. The trestle piers, those concrete piers, I made forms out of styrene, and then poured them in, and I wanted to get that like single board form look to the concrete footings. So the tunnel portal was something that was in Model Railroader back in the 60s or 70s. I just thought it kind of looked good. It was kind of a cross between a tunnel portal and a rock slide. So I added that just because I needed something there, and I know there's no Rio Grande prototype for it, but kind of proto freelancer, I guess, if it comes down to it. Highline Bridge 46C. Again, we see, just like in that Richardson photo, 461 with the kind of concealed a little bit behind the tree in the Sunrise Herald, bringing a stock extra over 46C. The caboose on the right, that was a scratch-built caboose. I built that out of styrene. And then we go on to 46A. So one of the things to kind of note, like I wanted to always build scenes in layers, so to speak. So one scene, each scene would draw you in, but also kind of pull you to the next place or conceal, or, you know, just it serves multiple purposes. And in this case, this ridge line here is actually on the other side is the Cumbres section house, water plug, and all of that. So I could actually reach over and access it if I needed to, and I have. So here's a close-up of 46A. I decided to change the look of the bridge by swapping out the prototype's concrete piers and replacing them with these cut stone piers. Just, I don't know, it was one of those moments where I just thought it looked different and looked a little bit unique. And to the right of the caboose here, there's a tunnel. And you can kind of see this tunnel in this picture. That tunnel is kind of an amalgamation of the Puricanti Needle, the Rio Grande Standard Gauge Tunnel District between Denver and Moffett Tunnel, and the tunnels of the Colorado Midland. I kind of threw them all into a hat and made that. I just wanted a scene break there too to kind of divide up the area. So once you pass through that, you end up at the Cresco Tank. And Cresco Tank is something I added a few months ago. I took a hammer out and just pounded out a hole and did the scenery there. But this is the only area of the layout where there's actually two scenes that you can see simultaneously. To the right area is the Animas Creek area. So the upper crossing of the Animas is a modified Central Valley Truss Bridge. The bridge and the location made a big impression on me as a teenager when I was riding on the narrow gauge for the first time. So I wanted to include it as a prototype, as that prototype scene. And it was also one bridge I didn't have to scratch build because I was doing a lot of scratch building or kit bashing. And, you know, it made sense to use it. So I did. And I also like the variety of the bridges used on the prototype. And it's also kind of a tip of the hat to John Allen and all his different bridges. This is actually a cove corner of the room that I showed you in that previous, during construction. A couple more views of the lower crossing of the Animas. It's actually double tracked. So one is the main and one is the lead in the passing siding for Chama. It's in similar design to the bridges at Cascade or at Lobato. But I finally got the courage to add in the Envirotex water about 2 years ago. I waited and waited. I used Envirotex and I tinted it with Alcad blue and green paints until I thought it looked good enough. And I was like kind of that green tint of the water going up to Silverton. So Cascade Trestle was a must signature scene that I had to model for my layout. The bridge is prototypically sized. I don't know if it's exact, but it's pretty close. The location on the layout was a significant design requirement during planning. How it would fit, where it would fit, and scenically look right was a major consideration. I wanted a significant valley, basically, that it was crossing. And also during the design phase, I wasn't really sure which bridge I wanted to model, Lobato or Cascade. They were pretty much identical in design, but I knew I had to model one of them. And the scenery around Cascade was the tiebreaker. It was no doubt that's the way I wanted to go. And then the next big decision of what color to paint it, because I looked at different photos and researching it. It was black, but that was earlier on. And then it went silver, and I'm glad I picked silver because I think it looks better and it shows the detail a little bit more. Here's another view, coming from, I guess, the other direction on Cascade, the prototype seen on the left. So my model of Cascade is, like I mentioned, it's pretty much prototypically the same length and height as the real thing. I built it from scratch, including those cast stone piers that it sits on. I made molds for that. The shorter trestle bents were made using Central Valley components, and then the two larger ones, because they have that tapered ends on the beams, I used Plastruck, and then sheet styrene was embossed with rivets so I could put in these steel panels. Was fortunate enough to find these bridge brackets made by Chooch, and that was the defining width for these. So I'm so glad I didn't have to scratch build all this lattice, because that would have been a nightmare. These tension wires were steel piano wire with Grant line turnbuckles. So that was my Cascade trestle. Oh, and I should mention too that the actual deck, you can pull the deck off. The bents are basically held in place with pins on the deck. So I thought if I ever had to get into that valley that it's sitting on, I didn't want to have to pull the whole bridge out. I could just take it out piece by piece. Fortunately, I haven't had to do that. So after crossing over Cascade and traveling down grade, we passed through this open rangeland. It's similar, kind of the valley, the Los Pinos area, between Cumbres and Osier. You know, if you ride the train, you see all the cattle in the open rangeland there. So I thought that would be, and then I did want to model the fence and the cattle guard. So that was the other reason behind it. I've gone on enough bike rides out in Colorado, and you come screaming down a mountain on a bike and hit a cattle guard. It's pretty exciting. But anyway, the cattle guard and the barbed wire fence was actually, the barbed wire fence was made with nylon screen that I cut single strands of and just painted it like a rusty brown, and then glued it to some twigs, some sticks that I found while camping. So it's pretty easy, pretty natural looking. And then I put in the flanger signs to make sure the flanger doesn't rip it up. I try to follow those prototypical practices for right-of-way signage. So just add some visual interest on the layout too. So kind of panning out away from that, you see the cattle on the left and the cattle guard. And the bridge that it's crossing over was at 492 sitting on, it's pulling into what I call Los Pinos. There's a story behind each one of these. So this was my first ever scratch built trestle, and you know, measured twice, cut once. Well, I figured out that partway through that the actual built trestle would not fit there. And the thing that I really liked about the built trestle were those wooden those footings here. So I made one in the middle of the stream and called it a day. Plus, built requires a lot of work. There's a lot of bends here. I was trying to build a layout and all this other stuff. And when I left HON3, I had nothing in SN3. I was building everything all at once. So if I could take a little shortcut, and this bridge was one of them, I did. So here's another picture, Goose 6 rolling over the bridge. Off to the right, you can kind of make out the Los Pinos section house, which was a building and structure kit. And here we go. Here's Los Pinos. Well, I call it Los Pinos because of the tank. So this tank has some sentimental value to it. It's a Durango Press HON3 kit, and it's really probably the first Craftsman kit I built while I was in college. And so I weathered it up and tried to use all the different techniques that I read about in the Gazette. And I was really proud of that. So years ago, there was a nitpicker who pointed it out that it was an HON3 tank on my SN3 layout. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, I better do something about that. But it sat for a while, but I ended up measuring it, and the tank itself measured out pretty much the same as an S-scale Los Pinos tank. So I replaced the supporting bents, and I'm not going to replace the roof. It's an octagon roof, and the Los Pinos had a round one, but that's close enough for me. The pump house I scratch built out of some styrene, and the other two buildings are building and structure. So a little bit of a higher view of that, raised elevation. So one of the things I wanted to do when I built the scenery was kind of, like I said, stitch it together, but have one scene support the other and kind of give you visual depth, like you're actually in that landscape as opposed to standing next to it, if that makes sense. So looking off in the distance, you can see some of the High Line, you can see Cascade Trestle, you can see in the upper right-hand corner that upper Animas River Bridge. So it felt like when I was riding my bike out there and looking off in the distance, wondering where the road went, I could kind of get that same impression of where do the rails go. So as we move out of Los Pinos, one of the areas that I also wanted to kind of model were the areas west of Antonito or around Minero, Dulce, that Mesa Country. So before I get into that, I kind of have to do like a step back. And my original Chama yard looked like this, the yard throat. I had that little general store and all of that. So I was having problems with it. The electrical connectivity of the points was failing and engines were stalling out, crossing all the switches. The yard throat was inaccessible because I had built all that scenery and I didn't want to climb over it. Something had to be done. So last March, upper right-hand corner is what happened. I tore it all out. So that store is gone. I mean, the store still lives. It's sitting on a shelf somewhere in my basement, but that scene no longer exists. So this is what happened, and this is kind of, get my pointer here. Anyway, over by the tank cars, I had to like slim down the Chama, the tank car facility from 4 cars to 2, I should say, and it was no longer double tracked. But so this is what the area looked like. These are up close and personal. I think these are the building and structure kits that I just wanted to put some something to like for that area to, I don't know, spruce it up a little bit. And I wanted to add more trees as well. So I'm adding more junipers to this mesa area. I need more. Like I said, it's one of the reasons why I model Utah on S scale is I don't need many, if any, trees. I also need to add some sage and other Mesa Country ground cover. I know there's been some recent articles I'm going to put to good use regarding doing that. So it's a work in progress. So Minero, which is west of Chama, in Mesa Country, had a couple of truck dumps for coal loading. That upper right photo is a prototype of a truck dump that I modeled. It's actually located outside of Moab, Colorado, on a spur of the Rio Grande Cane Creek branch. And if you look, that mesa you see in the distance is, if you go over that, that basically you're headed towards Dead Horse Point State Park and Islands in the Sky District of Canyonlands National Park. And then off to the left across the highway is Arches National Park. So there's spectacular scenery in every direction. That's why Chuck Conway's introductory remarks in Crest of the Continent really hit home with me. So I saw this truck dump on a couple of my different bike rides around the Moab area. And finally, on one of those trips, I stopped. I took a bunch of photos of it. I came home, scratch built it, and put it on my S scale layout. And then I decided I didn't like it there, so I tore it out. And then I decided it would fit better on my Sn3 layout. So that's where it sits now. As you can tell, I'm never afraid to like change stuff up on the layout. And I think that's a good thing overall. Anyway, here's Cumbres. Cumbres is probably one of my favorite locations on the layout. The height of Cumbres is almost 58 inches. So I'm 6'5", so for me, it's not eye level, but for a lot of people it is. And this is looking across the entire length of the room. So you get that whole vista. Again, a big debt of gratitude to all the great rail photographers like Kindig, Richardson, all those folks who made all those fantastic photos, hiked around, took all those pictures. And, I would spend hours just studying those pictures. And, if I can somehow recreate it in my basement, I'm really happy. So that's where I go. I look at those pictures and say, that's what I want to model. And that's the inspiration on, doing those different signature scenes. So, I did want to model the Rio Grande passenger train operations from Alamosa to Durango. And as you all know, Cumbres was the operational bottleneck for the Rio Grande main line. So there was a lot of action there bringing up trains. It was also the highest point on the railroad, so it needed the snow shed and lots of snow fighting equipment. That little flanger blade signal on the right there, that actually, I used that to, like, back when I was still running DCC, I could tell where the block was for switching out stuff. All the structures I built, except for the depot, which was an American Model Builders kit, were scratch built. The snow shed, I started picking up coffee stirs at a coffee shop, and then finally felt guilty. I'd asked them where they bought their coffee stir sticks. Went to there and bought like 2 or 3 boxes, I think for like $10, and then stained them. I used Wayne Wesolowski's method of sweet and sour, which is steel wool and vinegar, and then let it kind of decompose. So that's how I stained it, and I left a few boards nude, like it had been patched or repaired. I did want to include Mount Neff, which towers over Cumbres in the prototype. So on the back side of that, you see Mount Neff. And that's actually the reverse side of Windy Point and Toltec Gorge on the other side of the layout. Between Mount Neff and that ridge of trees, there's actually a big hole there. It's basically 8 feet across the layout at that point. So I had to get in there just to build the mountain and do some of that scenery. And my kids, when they were younger, used to take the step stool and get in there and pop out of there like Godzilla out of a volcano. So they liked it, and I would hide stuff on the layout too for them to find. So you notice a small group of rail fans by those vehicles next to the depot. I like to include people in scenes because I think, especially for non-modelers, they really help scale things out for the mind's eye. People relate to people, and they see, oh, that's how big I would be if I were standing there. The other thing, vehicles, I think, are really helpful for identifying time periods. More on that in a minute, but here's a view of Cumbres. Now, I found out that I really like planting weeds. It's one of the more relaxing aspects of the hobby, and especially when you have an adult beverage when you're doing it. So go down and grab a cold one and just randomly start planting trees, because it's not a golf course, or weeds, I should say, and stuff like that, because it's not really a golf course. Again, the vehicles, I think, really kind of help set the era. If I were to switch this out with modern vehicles, I could say it's the Cumbres and Toltec today. So when you think in terms of when visitors who are non-modelers show up, when they see vehicles, they kind of do the calendar math in their minds. They know kind of where they're at. So if you're standing near the end of the aisle near Cumbres, it's a dead end. This is kind of the vantage point you see. So you kind of like look over and down into the valley, and you can see, like in this case, a manifest coming over Cascade Trestle. The K36 484 was actually the first S-scale Sn3 locomotive I purchased. It's an Overland model. It's since I've upgraded it to DCC, but it's been a really good runner and kind of one of my favorites. The rotary water car, or right there, that's an Overland brass car. And then the PBL car, the rail multi-car behind it. That water column, I think it was made by Village Depot. And then the cistern marker behind it on the hill, it's just a quick scratch built thing. So this kind of gives you a good example of what I was trying to achieve visually with the scenery. Is like you see the foreground, but you see the background, and the background kind of recedes. So there's a ridge and another ridge, and then finally the actual backdrop itself. I think Lex Parker did the same kind of, one scene supports the next scene, and the whole layout kind of is a continuous model. So the Cumbres section house, I scratch built that from Mike Blazek plans. I think the Grant castings for the windows and the chimneys from building and structure were the only castings I used. And as anybody who's ever shingled a building like that knows, it's tedious as all get outs. The coal house is a Keith Blanchard Productions kit, and the outhouse was by Building and Structure, and then the water plug, again, Village Depot. If you notice, there's a little mechanical issue on Highway 17. I wanted to model that little trestle on Highway 17 at Cumbres, but it just wasn't going to fit. It was going to screw things up for the Ophir Highline, so I left it out. On to Chama. Another signature scene, right? Specifically, the yard east of the depot is what I really was after. Chama being the division point in the helper district, it means lots of motive power, and then all the service facilities for that. So one of the things I had to do on the prototype photo on the left, that's about where I put my turntable, because I didn't have room to build a Y, so I've got a turntable instead. The V&T, that's a V&T tank, and then a scratch built the other 3 buildings, those little maintenance away in the fire hose building. The coal shed was scratch built by a friend, and he got out of the hobby basically and gave it to me, which was right about the time I was going to start scratch building it, so I was happy to get it. And then the sand house I scratch built that. And that was really my first scratch built structure. If you look at those pile posts on the sand bin, those were actually tree branches that I was out camping, and I just started collecting them and came home and sorted through them and found the ones that looked about, the right size, and I liked the color on them, natural weathering. So I picked those up, and that's what I used for those. And then the rest of the building was pretty much made out of coffee stir sticks, and the roof was fine grit sandpaper. Except for the middle chimney, everything else was scratch built out of brass, those vents and everything like that. So I was pretty happy with the way that turned out. You can still see that there's a party line there. I set it on a base, set it in the location, but I haven't concealed that party line yet. I've been working like crazy trying to get this done. I started last March, and now I'm trying to get it all completed. The track work itself is, I did fast track jigs. I used those and all their tools. I used microengineering, PBL flex track, and let's see, Blue Point for the turnout throws, and I've got frog juicers on everything to make sure that everything runs smoothly. So the other end of the yard, I had to model the engine house and one of the wool warehouses. I only had room for one. Those were both scratch built out of styrene. And you can see the diamond scale turntable in the background. That's powered and indexed by a programmable turntable indexing system from New York Railway Supply. And then I like the Rio Grande motorway trucks, so I have a bunch of those different ones that I park there just for changing it up. So this is kind of, when I rebuilt my Chama yard, I built this portion of it was really the main emphasis. The main now has 2 passing sidings and this longer lead on the back end. So it makes it easier to make up trains and add and remove helpers. And that track actually leads to Placerville, which is over the sink. Those little orange dots are where the connecting rods are going to come through for the Blue Point switches. I just haven't had time to install those yet. So on to Placerville. I also like this Placerville in general because the depot is, I thought, was really cool. But I also like the San Miguel River and all the riprap and the log cribbing, and just it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, which is typical Rio Grande Southern. So I was really trying to capture that look and feel of close to the river, and you never know when the river might overflow with all that riprap and stuff like that. So PBL Goose 6 and my version of Placerville. I had really limited space for this. It's about this, probably 2.5 feet by 5 feet total. So I really had to be selective and condense a lot of stuff, but I did want to model the general store and post office. So I scratch built those. For the Placerville garage, I used a design preservation model, O-scale casting. It's just that center starting point, and then the rest came from some brick sheet that I had, some other stuff, and basically scratch built, kit bash, whatever you want to call it. The warehouses were scratch built out of styrene and greatly condensed just to fit the available space. And then the 3 different homes you see there are actually those Grant Line HO buildings. I just modified them with some S-scale doors and in some cases windows. The Org tipple was there just for scenic and operating interest. And it was a gift from the same modeler who gave me the coal towers. So I put that on the layout, and I'm happy with the way it looked. It's really more of a switching module than anything. I thought I wanted to do that, but I don't know. I might change my plans. You never know. So going back to the vehicles, there's so many different available 1/64th scale vehicles that it's hard for me to stop buying them. But I wanted to model some of the unique RGS vehicles too. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the Rio Grande Sunrise Herald to fit the doors, so I had to improvise. So in redoing the layout, you can see in that one photo, there's some yellow arrows pointing at a line on the hill. And that was Windy Point back in the day when I first built it. But I've been thinking more and more that it needed something else. And I had the Vance Junction kits from Building and Structure, and I was, in the back of my mind, it was there. And then 5 years ago, I crashed on a bike ride and I broke my leg and had surgery. And when I was recovering and learning how to walk again, I needed to do something. So I basically crawled down the stairs, grabbed the kits and enough tools to sit up in the kitchen and start building those kits. And then once I got them done, I thought I need somewhere place to put them. So I decided that I was going to retrofit Vance Junction into the side there. So I took the hammer out and away I went, and this is what it looks like today. Kind of an overview, and you can kind of see how it comes out. The Cumbres is in the upper left-hand corner, and 492 is rounding the main, and it's going to go by Windy Point in a moment. But so this actually becomes a staging yard for me that represents the East End, Antonito, Alamosa area of the layout. I just wanted to add, you're in the hobby long enough and you start accumulating a lot of equipment and you want to run it. You don't want to have it in boxes. So that was my, let's do something different. And so out came the hammer and reconstruction began. Like I mentioned, the section house and all these buildings were building and structure kits. One more look at Vance Junction, and that's a wrap. So see the Toltec Tunnel and Price River Bridge. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig. That's been absolutely absurd. It's just everybody's jaws are still on the floor, I think, watching this. A whole bunch of comments here, which we'll go through quickly. Okay. Colorado Memories is such a great book. Randy Scott, Bill Hobbs says, how many of us were inspired by John Allen? And my take on that would be, it might make more sense to say, is there anybody here who wasn't inspired by John Allen? Because I know anybody in my age group were just gobsmacked the first time they saw any of his work. Back cover of Model Railroader magazine for years and years. Jan Stugan says, John Allen inspired me for many years when I was young, and an HO scale. His work still inspires me today, and building his two-stall engine house in Sn3 scale. Mr. Reed says, most impressive scenery. What medium are you using for your rock work? I think you had that on one of your slides.
Yeah, I use, it's varied over the time, but like screen wire, chicken wire in some cases, but gypsylite. I don't know if you're familiar with gypsylite. You can buy it in 50-pound bags, and I've gone through probably 400 pounds of plaster over the years. You buy in 50-pound bags, and you put it on, it has a texture and a grit to it, which if you just leave it as is, looks perfectly good. And it's naturally a gray color as well, so it's not a crazy white or anything like that. So it's a muted gray color. And then I use dental plaster for the rock castings.
Yeah, I
I
believe you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, I apply them wet. Dental plaster dries super fast, super hard.
Yeah.
So it'll throw off heat. Well, it almost feels like you can burn yourself at times.
Greg, are you able to get the gypsylite at the home center, or you have to order that in? Or
I just looked yesterday because I was curious. I thought that might be a question. You can buy it at Home Depot. I
oh,
think it
okay,
was
great,
$15 for a 50-pound bag.
great. Steve Hollenbach says, great bridges. Uh, Jake Swaney, you have definitely captured the flavor of the prototype. Um, Dan Stenger, incredible scenery. John Allen would be proud. Good comment. Uh, Jake again, you obviously love building bridges. um, Keith Stamper, who's also got a spectacular scenery on his layout, beautiful scenery and backdrop. Did you paint the backdrops?
Yeah, I had that little tip of the hat to Bob Ross. I painted those. I would get up in the morning on Saturdays with a cup of coffee and watch him. And then when my kids were younger, I was up even earlier. So I'd watch multiple Bob Ross tree paintings lessons. So yeah.
Pete Smith, who's a member of our board here, after watching the dry run of your presentation, which was about a week ago, I was inspired to build a cattle guard. I researched the flanger warning sign to no avail. What color was the flanger sign, and can you point me to a source of information on the sign?
Yeah, they're basically like a red triangle on a post, like a metal
Okay.
post. Um,
Uh,
I
w.
don't know what the dimensions are. It just kind of looked right to me. So yeah, you see them
Uh,
too at road crossings occasionally.
oh, okay. Mr. Reed was saying the flanger signs were usually painted black. Um, Bill Hobbs, allowing the different scenes of your layout to serve as backdrop for other scenes helps create a feeling of real size and depth. I don't like layouts that feel too claustrophobic. Steve Hollenbach, great layout. Jim Spice, beautiful layout. Mr. iPad, great to see someone still scratch building. Well, if Mount Albert's wood orders are any indication, people are still scratch building. Either that, they're just they're burning it or something. Who knows? Um, Dave Adams, wonderful railroad, and I love your fearless approach to arranging scenes to get what you wanted to see. Yeah, that really captured me too. I thought that was really fascinating the way you want to create a scene and you don't feel like you're forced to have it a certain way just because that's the way the prototype was.
I wrestled with that for quite a while, and it just wasn't going to work. Building a mile railroad is this never-ending series of compromises against hard constraints of limited
Exactly.
limited space, time, and money, right?
Always. Jake Swaney asked, do you use plans or photos for the scratch built buildings and bridges?
You know, I rare I rarely use plans. I probably use photos and just wing it as much. Like Cascade Trestle, I knew what I wanted to look, what it should look like, but I wasn't really hung up on like the bridge section, the bents were so many scale feet apart. It's just like the micro engineering um, girders were the defining measurement for me.
Right,
So
right, right.
just
Yeah.
getting it
Well, that's
right there.
practical. Steve Blanchard says simply superb. Thank you, Craig. Oh, we got a thumbs up from Mr. iPad. Barry Dupler, great layout and super presentation. Mike McCarville, very inspirational. Mark Evans, wow. Mark Lewis, outstanding SN3 layout, Craig. Jim Curran, beautiful layout. Jim Spice makes me want to rip mine down and start over. Jim, don't do that.
It takes too long.
Yeah, it takes too long. Alex Brickhoff says, fantastic layout, beautiful detail. Thanks for sharing. Um, Doug Junda said that. Oh, okay, thanks. Thanks, Doug. Lynn's new iPad. What was used for water on the standard gauge scene?
Oh, like the scene on the right, I use the same stuff. Typical, I use Envirotex.
Envirotex, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
you
and then
mentioned that.
I just tinted it with LCAD paint. I had some LCAD blue and green paint, which I used to tint the inside of California Zephyr cars to the correct green blue tint.
Oh, right.
And I thought, okay, that probably worked for the water too. And I didn't know at the time if it was going to cause a chemical reaction or not. So, once I figured it out, I went full on and did every stream I could, like within a week.
They look great, yeah. This photo on the right, this photo on the right here is really captures that. And we have a visitor from about as far away from North America as you can get. Chris H, thanks, amazing from New Zealand. Bill Hawk, amazing. How far did you step out for Vance Junction?
How far did I step out?
It says, how far did you step out, quote unquote, for Vance Junction? Oh, when you changed that scene to add Vance Junction, how far did you come out? I think he's asking in terms of how much did you add?
I didn't add anything. I used the existing footprint. What I did is that windy point thing kind of dropped down to about 2 feet off the floor. Well, I just sacrificed vertical drop
Right.
basically,
Okay.
filled it in, and then came around. So what I did with that space underneath is I built a bookcase to put magazines and books in the room.
Good plan. Well, this has been great. I think that this is probably going to have hit a new high for us on our YouTube channel. You guys will be able to view this video again on our YouTube channel in sometime later in the week.